Captain Li Huan's boots echoed against the cold metal floor as he walked through the massive Vorthan mothership. The walls around him gleamed like mirrors, stretching up so high he could barely see the ceiling. Everything here was built to make visitors feel small and insignificant. The air tasted metallic, and strange blue lights pulsed along the corridor walls like a heartbeat. 2 Vortan guards flanked him on either side. These creatures stood nearly 3 meters tall, their bodies covered in dark chitinous armor that looked like it had grown from their skin. Their insect-like heads swiveled constantly, compound eyes scanning for threats. Each guard carried energy, weapons that hummed with barely contained power. "Keep moving, human," one guard clicked in broken standard. His voice sounded like grinding metal mixed with static. Behind Huan, Captain Park Su struggled to keep pace. The diplomatic officer's face was pale with sweat, and his hands trembled slightly as he clutched his datapad. This was his first time, aboard an alien vessel, and the sheer scale of everything was overwhelming. The corridor opened into a vast chamber that could have housed a small city. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above, while the floor was a complex pattern of interlocking hexagons that seemed to shift and move in the corner of your eye. Hundreds of Vortan delegates filled the space, their chittering voices creating a sound like 1,000 insects all talking at once. At the center of the chamber stood a raised platform where the most important Vortans waited. Commander Velthar dominated the group, his body easily twice the size of his subordinates. His forearms ended in razor-sharp claws, and bioluminescent patterns pulsed across his exoskeleton in complex rhythms that probably meant something in their culture. "Now the humans arrive," Velthar announced, his voice amplified by hidden speakers until it boomed through the chamber. "How delightfully prompt. We appreciate punctuality in our soon-to-be subjects." The other Vorthans erupted in their chittering laughter, a sound that made Huan's teeth ache. He forced himself to walk steadily toward the platform, his expression carefully neutral. He had trained for this moment for months, studying every piece of intelligence Earth had gathered about Vorthan psychology and culture. "Commander Velthar," Huan said with a slight bow. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "Meeting?" Velthar's mandibles clicked rapidly in what passed for amusement among his species. "This is not a meeting, little mammal. This is a surrender. Ceremony. The only question is whether you will submit gracefully or force us to demonstrate our superiority." The chamber's massive viewports showed the space outside, where the Vortan fleet floated in perfect formation. Each ship was a work of terrifying beauty, their organic curves suggesting they had been grown rather than built. Weapons ports dotted their hulls like paws, and energy fields crackled between them in complex patterns. In the middle of this armada sat the UES Thunder, looking impossibly small and fragile. The human ship was all straight lines and practical angles, built for function rather than intimidation. It looked like a child's toy surrounded by sleeping giants. "Your pathetic little ship," Velthar continued, gesturing toward the viewport with one of his clawed hands, "is barely the size of our fighter craft. Look at it. No organic curves, no adaptive armor, no quantum field generators. Just metal and circuits like something a primitive civilization might cobble together from scrap." The insult hit its mark. Several human colonies had indeed been built from salvaged materials in the early days of expansion. The Vorthans had done their research. "Our engineers would be embarrassed to claim credit for such crude workmanship," added Sub-Commander Klektar, his voice dripping with disdain. "Tell me, do you still use chemical propulsion? How charmingly retro." More chittering laughter filled the chamber. Park Su's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, but Huan caught his wrist with a quick gesture. Violence here would accomplish nothing except their immediate death. "We build what serves our needs," Huan replied calmly. "And what needs are those?" Velthar leaned forward, his massive bulk casting a shadow over the humans. "The need to die quickly when faced with real power, because that is the only service your little ship can provide." The chamber's lighting dimmed, and holographic displays materialized in the air around them. Star charts showed the 3 human colonies that lay closest to Vorthan space: New Busan, Haven's Rest, and Centauri Gardens. Each system pulsed with red warning markers. We offer you one final chance, Veltar announced, his forearms spreading wide in a gesture that might have looked generous if not for the cruel gleam in his compound eyes. These 3 worlds will be absorbed into our empire. Their populations will serve as workers in our expansion. In return, we will allow your remaining colonies to exist for now. And if we refuse, Juan asked, though he already knew the answer, then we will turn your worlds into examples. Every human settlement will burn until your species learns its proper place in the galactic hierarchy. Your children will grow up as our servants, grateful for the privilege of serving a superior race. The holographic displays shifted to show detailed scans of the human colonies, population centers, defensive installations, evacuation routes. The Vorthans had mapped everything with terrifying precision. They had been planning this for months, maybe years. 2 standard cycles, Velthar continued. 48 of your hours to make your choice. After that, our patience ends, and the cleansing begins. The other Vorthan delegates erupted in chittering approval, their compound eyes gleaming with anticipation. Some of them were already discussing which human technologies they wanted to study, and which population centers would make the best examples. Captain Park Su's face had gone completely white. He had seen the intelligence reports, knew exactly what cleansing meant in Vorthan terms. Entire civilizations reduced to ash and memory, their worlds stripped of resources and repurposed for Vorthan expansion. But Juan's expression remained perfectly calm. He studied the alien commander for a long moment, taking in every detail of his arrogant posture and cruel smile. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet that the chamber fell silent to hear him. We'll consider your generous offer. The A. Words carried an edge that made several Vorthans shift uncomfortably. There was something in the human captain's tone that didn't match his species' reputation for weakness and cowardice. For just a moment, Velthar's certainty wavered, but the moment passed and the commander's arrogance returned in full force. Consider quickly, little mammal. My fleet grows impatient, and some of my subordinates believe we should simply take what we want without offering you the courtesy of surrender. As the humans turned to leave, escorted by the same towering guards, Velthar called out one final insult. Perhaps you should spend these last hours teaching your young ones to speak proper Vorthan. They will need the skill in their new lives as our property. The chamber erupted in laughter again, but this time Juan didn't react at all. He simply walked toward the exit, his posture straight and his stride steady. Only Park Su saw the slight smile that flickered across his captain's face, gone so quickly it might have been imagination. Once the humans had departed, Velthar turned to his tactical officer. Deploy the fleet to their first colony. New Busan has the largest population, perfect for making our point clear. Let's show these mammals what real power looks like. The Vorthan war machine began to move, hundreds of massive ships adjusting their formation with predatory grace. They had crushed a dozen civilizations before humanity, and they expected this to be just as easy. After all, what could one small ship possibly do against the might of their entire fleet? They were about to find out. The UES Thunder's corridors buzzed with tension as Captain Li Huan made his way to the ship's heart. Emergency lighting cast red shadows on the walls, and crew members moved with the practiced urgency of people who knew their lives hung in the balance. The ship felt different now, almost alive with the energy coursing through its modified systems. Chief Engineer Kim Dahl stood before a massive cylindrical chamber that hadn't existed in the Thunder's original blueprints. The quantum compression core stretched from floor to ceiling, its polished surface reflecting the warning lights that covered every inch of the engineering bay. Heat dispersal vents lined the walls like gills, already working overtime to manage the enormous energy building. Inside, 2 years of sleepless nights led to this moment, Kim Dahl muttered, running her hands along the cylinder's surface. The metal was warm to the touch, vibrating with barely contained power that made her teeth ache. Every calculation, every simulation, every test that nearly killed us. She pulled up a holographic display showing the weapon's internal structure. Inside the chamber, magnetic fields compressed matter to impossible densities, while quantum processors calculated the exact moment of release. It was beautiful and terrifying, like holding a star in your hands. The theoretical calculations are sound, she explained as Captain Juan approached, her voice tight with nervous excitement. "But theory and reality are two different things. We've never fired this at full power. The energy requirements alone could tear the ship apart." Lieutenant Yun Tai looked up from his weapons console, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. The young officer had volunteered for this mission knowing he might not survive it. "We'll have maybe 30 seconds of operational capacity after firing," he reported, pulling up power distribution charts that showed the Thunder's entire energy grid. Everything non-essential shuts down immediately. Life support, artificial, gravity, communications, it all goes dark. The holographic displays painted a grim picture. Red warning zones covered most of the ship's systems, indicating critical overload risks. Yellow zones showed areas that would probably survive the energy drain. There weren't many green zones left. Juan studied the readouts, his mind racing through tactical possibilities. Every detail mattered now. The angle of approach, the timing of the shot, the precise positioning of enemy vessels. Everything had to be perfect because they would only get one chance. "Show me the Vorthan fleet composition again," he ordered. The main display shifted to show intelligence gathered over the past 6 months. Massive dreadnoughts formed the fleet's backbone, each one capable of glassing a planet's surface. Smaller cruisers and destroyers filled support roles, while clouds of fighter craft buzzed around the larger vessels like angry insects. "They always travel in tight formations," Yuntai observed, highlighting the tactical data. "Standard Vorthan doctrine calls for overlapping shield coverage and concentrated firepower. They've used the same strategy for centuries. Because it works," Kim Dal added grimly. "No single weapon has ever been powerful enough to threaten an entire fleet. Until now." 2 years of secret development had led to this moment. While the galaxy dismissed humanity as primitive and weak, Earth's brightest minds had worked in hidden laboratories and secure facilities. They hadn't tried to build bigger ships or more conventional weapons. Instead, they had focused on efficiency and innovation, creating something the galaxy had never seen before. The quantum compression cannon wasn't just a weapon, it was humanity's answer to the galaxy's contempt. Other species built massive ships that took decades to construct and required enormous crews. Humans had built something small enough to fit on a single vessel, but powerful enough to rewrite the rules of space combat. "Dr. Choimin," Juan called to the physicist monitoring the compression readings from her station near the core. "How long do we have?" Dr. Choimin looked up from her instruments, her face pale in the red emergency lighting. She had been tracking the Vorthan fleet's movement since they left the diplomatic meeting, calculating their speed and trajectory with obsessive precision. "The Vorthan fleet will reach New Busan colony in 18 hours, she replied grimly. 50,000 civilians, with nowhere to run. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. New Busan was one of humanity's newest colonies, built around vast agricultural domes that fed 3 other systems. The colonists were farmers and scientists, not soldiers. They had no warships, no planetary defense systems, no way to fight back against the Vorthan armada. Juan nodded slowly, his expression grim. The Vorthans had chosen their target well. New Busan was far from Earth's main defensive fleets, isolated and vulnerable. It was perfect for making an example, a demonstration of Vortan power that would break humanity's will to resist. "They expect us to watch helplessly while our people die," he said quietly. "They think we'll surrender after seeing what they can do to defenseless civilians." The bridge crew exchanged glances. Everyone knew the Vorthan reputation for cruelty. They didn't just destroy their enemies, they made them suffer first. Entire populations would be enslaved, their world stripped of resources and left as barren monuments to Vorthan supremacy. But the Vorthans had made one critical mistake. They assumed that because humanity's ships were smaller and less numerous, humans were weak. They had never encountered a species that solved problems through innovation rather than raw force. Kim Dal activated another display showing the Thunder's modified systems. The ship looked almost identical to its original configuration from the outside, but inside, everything had been rebuilt around the quantum compression core. Power conduits ran through every deck, backup generators filled former cargo holds, and emergency cooling systems replaced recreational facilities. The crew quarters are now filled with backup power cells, she explained. We've stripped out everything except essential systems. This ship has one purpose now, to deliver that weapon to its target. Lieutenant Yun Tae pulled up tactical, projections showing different firing solutions. If we can get them to cluster their fleet in a tight formation, one shot should be enough. The quantum compression field will expand exponentially once it reaches critical mass. And if we miss? Huan asked. Then we die, Yun Tae replied simply. The weapon takes everything we have. After firing, we'll be defenseless. Dr. Choi Min spoke up from her station. The Vorthans always use the same intimidation tactics. They'll surround the colony to maximize psychological impact, positioning their fleet in a sphere formation to show off their numbers. If we can trigger that response, we can catch them all in one attack, Huan finished. It was audacious, desperate, and completely insane. It was also humanity's only chance. The captain looked around at his crew, brilliant engineers, dedicated, officers, and scientists who had volunteered for what might be a suicide mission. They could have stayed safe on Earth, but instead they had chosen to stand between their people and annihilation. Set course for New Busan, Huan ordered, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Maximum burn. All power to the engines. The Thunder's modified drive systems roared to life, pushing the ship beyond its original design limits. The quantum compression core hummed louder as power flowed through the ship's systems, building toward the moment when everything would be decided by a single shot. "Captain," Kim Dal called out as they accelerated toward their destination, "there's something else you should know. The energy discharge will be visible from light years away. Every species in this sector will know what happened." Huan nodded. Grimly. There would be no hiding what they were about to do. The galaxy would learn that humanity possessed a weapon capable of destroying entire fleets, and that knowledge would change everything. "Then let's make sure they remember why they should never underestimate human engineering again," he said. The Thunder raced through space toward its destiny, carrying 57 souls and the hopes of an entire species. Behind them, the Vorthan fleet moved with predatory confidence toward what they expected to be an easy massacre. They were about to discover that humans were full of surprises. The void around New Busan colony erupted with the arrival of the Vorthan armada. One by one, massive ships dropped out of hyperspace with flashes of brilliant blue light, their arrival creating ripples in space-time that made the stars themselves seem to shiver. The lead dreadnought emerged first, a kilometer-long behemoth that looked like it had been carved from living bone and metal. Commander Velthar stood on his flagship's bridge, watching through the massive viewports as his fleet took position. The bridge itself was a testament to Vorthan engineering. Organic curves flowed seamlessly into technological perfection, with bioluminescent displays that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air thrummed with the ship's living systems, and the floor, beneath his feet, felt warm and slightly yielding, as if the entire vessel was breathing. "Formation Omega-7, he commanded, his forearms moving in complex gestures that his crew understood instantly. "I want them to see every gun, every ship, every instrument of their destruction." The Vorthan fleet moved like a living organism, hundreds of vessels sliding into perfect position around the small agricultural world. Massive dreadnoughts formed the outer shell, their plasma cannon arrays glowing with barely contained energy. Smaller cruisers and destroyers filled the gaps between them, while clouds of fighter craft buzzed around the larger ships like angry wasps. From space, New Busan looked peaceful and defenseless. The planet's surface was covered with vast agricultural domes that gleamed like jewels in the system's golden sunlight. Between the domes, forests of earth trees grew in carefully planned patterns, their green canopies providing oxygen and beauty to the 50,000 colonists who called this world home. Those colonists were now huddled in emergency shelters, watching the sky fill with alien warships. Children pressed against reinforced windows, asking their parents why the stars looked different today. The adults had no good answers to give. "Sir," reported Subcommander Klektar from his tactical station, "human communications are filled with panic broadcasts. They're trying to organize evacuation ships, but they have nowhere to run." Velthar's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. Fear was a weapon just as powerful as plasma cannons, and the Vorthans had perfected its use over centuries of conquest. Let the humans scramble and panic. It would make their eventual surrender all the sweeter. Contact their government, he ordered. Tell them their champions have arrived. The communication went out across all frequencies, reaching not just New Busan but every human settlement within 100 light years. The message was simple. Witness the price of defying the Vorthan Empire. It was then that the UES Thunder appeared. The human ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, its arrival marked by a brief flicker of drive energy that was almost invisible compared to the Vorthan fleet's spectacular entrance. The Thunder looked impossibly small against the backdrop of the alien armada, like a minnow swimming among sharks. On the Thunder's bridge, Captain Li Huan studied the massive formation arrayed before him. Every tactical display showed the same. Impossible odds. One small human vessel against hundreds of enemy ships. His crew worked with quiet efficiency around him, their faces tense but determined. "Sir," reported Communications Officer Li Jin, "we're receiving multiple target locks. From the enemy fleet. They could destroy us at any moment." "They won't," Huan replied with quiet confidence. "Not yet. They want to make a show of this." He was right. On the Vorthan flagship, Velthar watched the tiny human ship approach with something approaching amusement. The UES Thunder looked almost comical against the backdrop of his overwhelming fleet, its simple geometric lines and utilitarian design marking it as clearly inferior to Vorthan biotechnology. "They come to surrender," chittered his tactical officer, compound eyes gleaming with anticipation. As expected, the mammals finally understand their place in the cosmic order. "Open a channel," Velthar commanded. When the connection was established, his voice boomed across all frequencies with the confidence of absolute power. "Captain Li Huan, you see our might arrayed before you. Your people below await their fate. Kneel before the Vorthan Empire, and we may grant them a swift end." The human captain's response came after a carefully calculated pause. "Commander Velthar, we request safe passage for civilian evacuation ships. Grant us 6 hours to remove non-combatants from New Busan." The alien commander's laughter was like grinding metal, mixed with the screech of tearing fabric. Around him, his bridge crew joined in with their own chittering amusement. The sound was broadcast across the human ship, designed to break their spirit before the real violence began. "How generous am I?" Velthar declared, his forearms spreading wide in a gesture of mock benevolence. "Yes, gather your sheep so they may watch your defeat together. But your pathetic warship remains as witness to Vorthan supremacy." Perfect, Huan thought as he studied the tactical displays. The enemy fleet had tightened their formation exactly as hoped, drawn together by their desire to create the most intimidating display possible. Every major vessel was now clustered within a 15-kilometer radius, their overlapping shields creating a brilliant aurora of defensive energy. The Vortans had no idea they had just arranged themselves into the perfect target. "Commander," Huan said into his transmitter, "your generosity is noted. We'll begin evacuation procedures immediately." On the surface of New Busan, the colonists watched in confusion as empty transport ships began launching from the spaceports. The vessels rose toward the stars, but seemed to be moving away from the planet rather than toward it. Most of the civilians couldn't understand what was happening, but a few of the more experienced spacers began to realize that this wasn't a real evacuation at all. It was theater, designed to position the enemy fleet exactly where the humans wanted them. Deep in the Thunder's engine room, Chief Engineer Kim Dahl monitored the quantum compression chamber as it built toward full power. The massive cylinder now glowed with contained energy, its surface so hot that the air around it shimmered like a mirage. Warning alarms had been silenced. They were no longer necessary. Everyone on board knew exactly how dangerous their situation had become. "Compression chamber at 90%, she reported over the intercom, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. "All power systems ready for transfer on your command." Lieutenant Yoon Tae hunched over his targeting console, sweat beading on his forehead as he fine-tuned the weapon's aim. The quantum compression cannon required perfect precision. Too high and the shot would pass over the enemy fleet. Too low and it would be absorbed by the planet's gravity well. Target lock acquired on Formation Center, he reported, his voice tight with concentration. Distance optimal, angle calculated for maximum effect. One shot, sir, we won't get another. Around the bridge, the Thunder's crew made their final preparations. Medical Officer Dr. Park Soo sealed the emergency medical bay and activated the automated surgical systems. Engineer Technician Cho Won secured all loose equipment and activated the emergency gravity anchors. Communications Officer Lee Jin recorded a final message to Earth, just in case they didn't survive the next few minutes. Juan took a deep breath, thinking of the 50,000 souls on the planet below and the billions more throughout human space who would live or die based on what happened next. He thought of his daughter back on Earth, probably doing her homework right now with no idea that her father was about to attempt something that would either save humanity or doom it forever. The Vorthan fleet waited in perfect formation there, weapons trained on the helpless colony below. They had no idea that the small human ship they were ignoring had just become the most dangerous vessel in the galaxy. All hands, Juan announced over the ship's intercom, his voice carrying to every corner of the Thunder. Brace for firing sequence. In 30 seconds, we're going to show the galaxy what human engineering can really do. On the Vorthan flagship, Commander Velthar was already composing his victory report to the High Command. The conquest of humanity would be complete within days, and his name would be remembered forever as the one who brought these upstart mammals to heel. He had no idea that he was about to become the first victim of humanity's secret weapon, and that his name would indeed be remembered as the alien commander who fatally underestimated the ingenuity of the human species. The Thunder's quantum compression chamber reached full power, and the fate of two civilizations hung in the balance of a single, perfect shot. The moment had arrived. Captain Li Huan's finger hovered over the firing control as the Thunder's hull began its transformation. With a series of mechanical clicks that echoed through the ship's corridors, armored plates slid apart along the vessel's spine. Hidden beneath the ordinary-looking exterior, the quantum compression cannon revealed itself like a predator, baring its fangs. The weapon's barrel was a thing of terrible beauty, 3 meters wide and polished to a mirror shine, lined with electromagnetic coils that pulsed with building energy. Steam vented from cooling systems as the temperature inside the cannon reached levels that would melt most known metals. The air around the weapon shimmered with heat distortion, making it look like something from a fever dream. Power at maximum, Chief Engineer Kim Dal reported, her voice tight with controlled panic. All systems feeding into the compression chamber. We're pulling energy from life support, artificial gravity, even the emergency lights. Everything we have is going into this one shot. The ship's lights dimmed as every available electron was channeled into the weapon. The comfortable hum of the Thunder's systems died away, replaced by an ominous vibration that seemed to come from the very fabric of space-time itself. In the engineering bay, the quantum compression chamber glowed white-hot, its containment fields stretched to their absolute limits. Commander Velthar noticed the human ship's transformation from his position on the Vorthan flagship's bridge. The small vessel that had seemed so pathetic moments before was now revealing something unexpected. Energy readings from his sensors spiked off the charts, showing power levels that shouldn't be possible from such a tiny ship. "What are they doing?" he asked, leaning forward with sudden interest. His compound eyes focused on the Thunder's changing configuration, trying to understand what he was seeing. Some kind of surrender ceremony, a final gesture of defiance. His tactical officer's voice carried a note of uncertainty that was rare among the arrogant Vorthans. "Sir, their energy output is unprecedented. I've never seen readings like this. Impossible." Velthar dismissed with a wave of his clawed hand. "No human technology could threaten our fleet. They're probably overloading their reactor in a desperate suicide attempt." He was wrong. Catastrophically, fatally wrong. The quantum compression cannon fired. Space itself seemed to scream as the weapon discharged. A brilliant flash erupted from the Thunder's spine, turning the void around New Busan into a blazing white inferno that could be seen from neighboring star systems. The light was so intense that the Thunder's own crew was temporarily blinded despite their protective visors. But the flash was just the beginning. The quantum compression cannon didn't fire energy or matter. It fired gravity itself. A sphere of pure gravitational force exploded outward from the weapon's barrel, expanding at near light speed toward the clustered Vorthan fleet. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The first Vorthan ships to encounter the expanding gravity simply ceased to exist in any recognizable form. Their energy shields, designed to deflect particle beams and plasma bolts, instead fed power directly into the growing singularity. The shields collapsed instantly, leaving the ships defenseless against forces that could crush planets. "By the ancestors," whispered Subcommander Klektar as he watched his instruments go insane. "What have they done?" The massive dreadnoughts that had seemed so invincible moments before began to stretch and deform like children's toys made of soft plastic. Metal hulls that could withstand direct hits from antimatter weapons warped and twisted as tidal forces pulled them apart, atom by atom. The proud vessels of the Vorthan Empire stretched into impossible shapes before snapping like rubber bands, their matter streaming into the artificial black hole in brilliant spirals of superheated plasma. "Impossible!" Velthar shrieked as his flagship's gravity sensors overloaded and exploded in showers of sparks. The massive dreadnought that had been his pride and joy now shuddered like a living thing in its death throes. "All ships emergency burn. Full power to engines, escape vector." His words died as the bridge around him began to warp and twist. The organic curves of Vorthan biotechnology, so beautiful and perfect in normal space, became grotesque distortions as gravity waves tore through the ship's structure. The living walls pulsed and writhed as if in agony, their bioluminescent displays flickering frantically before going dark forever. Velthar's forearms reached for his command controls, but the distance between his hands and the console seemed to stretch infinitely. Space and time twisted around him as the artificial black hole's event horizon reached out with hungry fingers. His last thought was a moment of pure, terrified understanding. The humans had created something beyond his comprehension, something that made his mighty fleet look like toys in comparison. The Vorthan Armada, moments before an unstoppable force of conquest, became a cloud of superheated plasma and twisted metal feeding the hungry gravity well. Hundreds of ships that had taken years to build and crew were reduced to their component atoms in seconds. The sphere of destruction expanded outward, consuming everything in its path with indifferent hunger. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The artificial black hole collapsed in on itself, its brief existence ending as the Thunder's power finally gave out. The quantum compression chamber went dark, its work complete. But the gravitational shockwaves continued to ripple outward, sending massive energy pulses racing through space at the speed of light. Aboard the Thunder, alarms screamed as the ship's systems shut down one by one. The vessel tumbled through space like a dead leaf in a hurricane, its crew pressed against their restraints by tremendous G-forces that threatened to tear them apart. Emergency lighting flickered on and off as the ship's backup systems struggled to maintain basic life support. "Hull integrity at 30%, Kim Dahl shouted over the cacophony of failing systems. "Forward sections are completely compromised. Engine room is completely dark. We're running on emergency batteries only." The Thunder's bridge was a chaos of sparking consoles and emergency warnings. Captain Juan fought to remain conscious as his vision grayed from the crushing acceleration. Blood trickled from his nose where the G-forces had burst small vessels, but he forced himself to focus on the cracked viewport ahead, where hundreds of Vorthan ships had been clustered in their perfect formation. There was now only empty space. Not debris, not wreckage, nothing at all. The artificial black hole had consumed every trace of the enemy fleet, leaving behind only the faint glow of residual radiation and the stunned silence of space itself. Lieutenant Yun Tae hung limply in his restraints, his targeting console dark and smoking. With tremendous effort, he raised his head and looked out at the empty void where the Vorthan Armada had been. Did we get them all?" he gasped, his voice barely audible over the ship's failing systems. Captain Juan managed a grim smile despite the pain lancing through his body. Through the cracked viewport, he could see New Busan still spinning peacefully in the distance, its agricultural domes gleaming in the system's golden sunlight. 50,000 innocent civilians were safe, and the Vorthan threat had been eliminated. Completely. Every last one, he whispered. The Thunder continued its helpless tumble through space, but its crew had accomplished the impossible. One small human ship had destroyed an entire alien fleet with a single shot, proving that human ingenuity could triumph over overwhelming odds. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again. In the distance, emergency beacons began broadcasting from New Busan, calling for rescue ships to aid the damaged Thunder. The colonists they had saved were already organizing relief efforts, determined to help the heroes who had risked everything to protect them. The age of human expansion was about to begin, and it would be built on the foundation of this single, perfect moment when one shot changed everything. 6 months after the Battle of New Busan, the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Admiral Li Huan stood in his dress uniform before the massive assembly hall on Kepler Prime, the neutral station that served as the galaxy's diplomatic heart. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built by dozens of species working together in one of the few places where politics took a back seat to necessity. The assembly hall stretched out before him like a vast amphitheater, its curved walls rising hundreds of meters toward a transparent dome that showed the stars beyond. Representatives from 47 different species filled the chamber, their varied forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity. Some breathed oxygen like humans, while others existed in specialized atmospheric bubbles or environmental suits. But today they all had one thing in common. They were afraid of humanity. The quantum compression weapon represents a fundamental shift in galactic warfare. Huan continued his address, his voice carried by translation systems to every corner of the hall. But humanity did not develop this technology for conquest. We created it for survival. In the front rows, the most powerful species in the galaxy sat in uncomfortable silence. The crystalline hegemony delegates, beings of living diamond who had controlled trade routes for millennia, shifted nervously in their specially constructed chairs. Behind them, the gas giant-dwelling Nebula Collective floated in their atmospheric spheres, their bioluminescent communications flickering with agitation. The Krathari ambassador was perhaps the most unsettled of all. Ambassador Sektar was 7 feet of scaled muscle and predatory intelligence, his people renowned as the galaxy's fiercest warriors. The Krathari had built their empire through conquest and intimidation, but now they faced a species that could erase entire fleets with a single shot. "Admiral," Sektar hissed, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air nervously, "surely you understand our concern. This weapon of yours represents a threat to the established order. No single species should possess such devastating power." Huan met the reptilian being's yellow eyes without flinching. "The quantum compression system requires our ship's entire power grid and leaves us vulnerable for hours afterward," he explained patiently. "It is not a weapon of conquest, but of last resort. We cannot use it for aggressive action, only to defend ourselves when all other options have failed." The truth was more complex, but Huan saw no need to reveal all of humanity's capabilities. The rebuilt Thunder was indeed vulnerable after firing, but Earth's shipyards were now working around the clock to change that equation. Soon, humanity would have a fleet capable of defending every human world simultaneously. Elder Zohmak of the ancient Ethereal Council rose slowly from his position at the center of the assembly. The Ethereals were among the oldest species in the galaxy, their translucent forms existing partially in normal space and partially in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. When an Ethereal spoke, the entire galaxy listened. "In 3,000 years of galactic history," Zohmak intoned, his voice like wind through crystal chimes, "no single vessel has ever destroyed an entire fleet. The Vorthan Armada numbered 437 ships. They simply ceased to exist. You have fundamentally altered the balance of power." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The destruction of the Vorthan fleet had become legend in just 6 months, growing in the telling until some versions claimed the humans had opened a gateway to another dimension. The truth was almost as incredible as the myths. Behind Huan, Chief Engineer Kim Dahl monitored the proceedings from the rebuilt UES Thunder, which hung in orbit around Kepler Prime. The ship looked identical to its previous configuration from the outside, but she knew every detail of the improvements, hidden within its hull. The new quantum compression chamber was smaller, more efficient, and could fire twice before requiring a complete power cycle. More importantly, she knew about the 12 identical vessels under construction in Earth's orbital shipyards. The galaxy thought humanity had one miraculous weapon. They had no idea that a fleet of Thunder-class ships would soon patrol human space. The political aftermath of the Battle of New Busan had been swift and dramatic. The Vorthan Empire's remaining colonies had sued for peace within weeks, their military command structure shattered by the loss of their primary fleet. The proud insectoid species that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries now offered tribute and trade agreements to the humans they had once dismissed as primitives. Other aggressive species had taken note and adjusted their behavior accordingly. The Nexari Syndicate, a collection of militant traders who had been raiding human shipping lanes for years, suddenly became model galactic citizens. The Silicon hegemony offered technology exchanges and mutual defense pacts. Even the mysterious Shadow Fleet, pirates who operated from the galaxy's dark matter regions, sent envoys seeking non-aggression treaties. The Draconi Republic wishes to establish formal diplomatic relations, announced Ambassador Velnara, her serpentine form coiled in the speaker's circle. The Draconi were dragon-like beings who had previously refused to acknowledge humanity's existence. We offer our services as mediators in any future conflicts. Similar offers came from around the chamber. Species that had ignored humanity for decades now competed for favorable trade agreements and military cooperation pacts. The shift was so dramatic that some observers wondered if they were witnessing the birth of a new galactic superpower. But Juan knew better. Humanity's strength lay not in their weapons, but in their adaptability and innovation. The quantum compression cannon was just the beginning. Human scientists were already working on technologies that would make it look primitive by comparison. The offer stands, Juan concluded his speech, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. Humanity extends friendship to all who would have it. We seek peaceful coexistence, mutual prosperity, and the expansion of knowledge for all species. He paused, letting his next words sink in with deliberate weight. But we will never again bow to threats or surrender our people to those who mistake mercy for weakness. As the assembly dissolved into urgent whispered conversations, news reports, carried across the galaxy, told of humanity's diplomatic triumph. On 100 worlds, alien scientists worked desperately to understand human technology, while their governments quietly revised expansion plans that had once targeted human space. In research facilities from the galactic core to the outer rim territories, teams of the galaxy's brightest minds tried to reverse engineer the quantum compression system. They failed, not because the technology was beyond them, but because they couldn't replicate the uniquely human approach to problem-solving that had created it. Other species built larger ships, more powerful weapons, and more sophisticated defenses. Humans built smarter solutions that turned their enemies' strengths against them. It was a fundamental difference in thinking that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The age of humanity had begun not with conquest or empire building, but with a single perfect shot that changed everything. In the months and years to come, human explorers would push deeper into unknown space. Human scientists would unlock new secrets of the universe, and human diplomats would help forge a more peaceful galaxy. But they would do it all from a position of strength, never again vulnerable to those who would prey upon the perceived weakness of a young species. The galaxy had learned to respect humanity, and that respect would pave the way for a future none of them could yet imagine. The Thunder hung in orbit above Kepler Prime, its quantum compression cannon hidden but ready, a reminder to the galaxy that humanity was no longer the helpless newcomer they had once been. The stars held infinite possibilities, and humanity was ready to claim their place among them. The end.